Chapter 30, Plant Form and Physiology. Now, instead of the word form, we could use anatomy. So we're basically talking about plant structure and the way that the component structures work in the plant. A lot of this material has already been covered in previous chapters. Firstly, we'll take a look at some of the anatomical features. We have talked before about anything that is above the ground is what we call the shoots, and anything below the ground is called the roots. So when we take a closer look at the shoots, we see that anything that is the green portions of the plant, or the vegetative parts, include the leaves and the stems. Additionally, as part of the shoot system, we have the parts of the plant that engage in the reproduction activities. So that would include the flowers and the fruits. And as we are talking here just about angiosperms, we will be looking only at flowers and fruits. When we look at the roots, the root system below the ground is what's very important for supporting the plants and collecting water and minerals which need to get transferred to the shoot system. Now, for types of plant tissues, so we have undifferentiated tissues, and then we also have differentiated. So when I say undifferentiated, what I mean is that these are tissues that allow for continuous growth of the plant. They are the stem cells of the plant and can become any one of the plant tissues. So as the plant continues to grow, it will draw on the meristem tissue in order to become new parts of its body. So we know that there are apical meristems. These are on the ends of the plants, and this allows for growth in length at the tips of both the shoots and the roots. So growing taller towards the sun, growing longer down into the ground. Additionally, some plants will have lateral meristems, which increase the growth in the width or the thickness of a plant. Now, once this tissue decides what it wants to be when it grows up, it becomes differentiated. So it becomes a particular kind of tissue, and it will stay that tissue forever. So when we look at the different types of plant tissues, we see that there are epidermis, which we can alike to the skin of the plant. We find it on the surfaces of leaves and stems, and it's involved in gas exchange. We'll take a closer look at this in a few slides. We also see that the epidermis on the roots helps with taking up water and the minerals that are needed, and this occurs through tiny structures called root hairs that increase the surface area. We also have vascular tissues in our plants. This refers, these are found in the stems and the leaves, and we often call them the veins. So we have two types of tubes which carry liquid materials. We have the xylem, which carries water, as well as dissolved ions from the roots up into the stems and the leaves of the plant. So roots to shoots. We also have the phloem, which carries the dissolved sugars made in the leaves to other parts of the plant, and then oftentimes to the root for storage. So this usually moves shoots to roots. And then we have the ground tissues. So this is the basic material. It would be analogous to the muscles and the bones in an animal. So we find ground tissues in stems, leaves, and roots. When we take a closer look at the leaf portion, we'll see that there's the mesophyll part of the leaf. It's the middle. Meso means middle. And this is where the cells which undergo photosynthesis can be found. And then we also find in the stems the pith and the cortex regions. These are supporting cells which help keep the plant upright. In the roots also have tissue which is called cortex, and this often is a place where carbohydrates are stored, or starches. So let's take a look at the first differentiated tissue, the epidermal tissue. So this is what we find on the tops and bottoms of leaves and then around the outside of stems. And this allows for the intake of gases as well as for the entry of some water. So remember that on the bottom of the leaf in the epidermal tissue, only on the bottom, we have openings called stomata. So here is one stoma, and it is surrounded, so that's just the hole. It's surrounded by two cells which can squeeze together to close the stoma. These two cells are called guard cells. So they're specialized cells in the epidermis on the underside of leaves, which allow for the exchanges of gases as well as water. When we look at the stem portion, we do see that there is an epidermal coating around the very outside. And then we see that there is a central region called the pith. So this lightish bluish green region is the pith. And that is where we find the support structures. And then in between the pith and the cortex here and the epidermis on the outside, we have the xylem and the phloem, which are in between. So let's take a closer look at that xylem and phloem, which is our vascular tissue. That's our one type of differentiated tissue. And we see two cross sections through stems, one of a dicot plant. Remember, dicots are plants that have two cotyledons in the seed. They also have 4 to 5 flower parts. And we see that their xylem and phloem are assembled in bundles. So here we have one bundle with some xylem and phloem, but the bundles are aligned in a ring around the pith, or the more central region. So that's where dicot is. And remember, the xylem and phloem will be extending up and down. This is a cross section through, but think about the xylem and phloem sort of coming out at you if it was allowed to continue. When we look at the monocot stem, so this would be grasses and plants like corn, monocots have a single cotyledon and veins in the leaves which are parallel and flower parts of 3. We see that the vascular bundles, we still have vascular bundles with xylem and phloem, but they're kind of arranged in a scattered pattern all over the place. And then in between, we have the ground tissue. So how does growth occur in stems? Well, we have primary growth, and the primary growth is growth in length. This occurs by apical meristems at the tips of the shoots or the tips of the roots. So here we see primary growth, and we would have a set of xylem and phloem. This happens to be in a dicot with a pith in the very center. But if it is a plant that is allowed secondary growth, which is growth in width, so if it's a plant that can get wider, like in a tree, then we will see that this centralized region with its xylem and the pith, and then the primary phloem, we see an increase in these circular regions, which are secondary xylem and secondary phloem, go in between the primary xylem and the primary phloem, and they help to form, these secondary regions help to form the bark of the tree. The very outer rim of the bark is called the cork layer, and this would be analogous to the dead cells which are on the very outside of our skin, that cork layer. So secondary growth is growth in width, primary growth is growth in length. Now let's take a look at are components of stems. What are the anatomical structures we find in stems? So here is a stem, and we see that where leaves attach, we have what we call a node. So here we have a bunch of leaves attaching. That's one node. Here there are some more leaves attaching. That is another node. Therefore, the region in between two nodes for leaf attachment is called an internode. Internode would be the region between two nodes. Then, where you have a stalk which extends from the stem out to the leaf, so this is sort of the stem of the leaf, we're going to call that a petiole. So the petiole is the stem of the leaf. Now let's take a look at the anatomical parts to leaves. So the main structure of the leaf, or the body of the leaf, is called the lamina. That's the leaf blade. Then we have the stem, which we already saw in the last picture. That's the petiole. We have a main vein. The veins carry the vascular tissue. The main vein is called the midrib. And then there's extensions out from the main rib, which are either a network of veins if we have a dicot, or we would have parallel veins in a monocot. So as I just mentioned, venation is the pattern of the veins. If you have straight parallel veins to the midrib, then that happens in monocots. So for example, tulips are monocots with the straight veins. If you have a midrib with branching veins, that's a network, and we see that in a lot of trees, like this linden tree leaf. And then this is a specialized pattern for the ginkgo. You don't have to remember its specialized name. So now let's dive deeper into the leaf structure. We already mentioned the epidermis. So if we do a cross-section through the leaf, we see that there is an upper layer of skin and a lower layer of skin. So we have the upper epidermis that faces the sun. We have the lower epidermis in which we find the openings, the stoma. And so around each stoma, you will have two cells, two guard cells. When the stoma is opened, this allows for the exchange of gases. Carbon dioxide in, which is needed for photosynthesis. Oxygen out, which is a waste product of photosynthesis. Also, not shown in this picture, but water vapor can move in and out of these stoma as well. In the middle region, we have what's called the mesophyll. There are two branches of the mesophyll. You don't need to know their particular names, but you just need to know that the mesophyll, or the middle, meso means middle, this middle region kind of sounds like chlorophyll, and that's because that's where all the cells that have chloroplast filled with chlorophyll are located. These are all the cells who will be undergoing photosynthesis. And the last thing, remember that on the very outside layer of both the lower and the upper, you have a cuticle layer, which is a waxy covering to help reduce water loss. So water can only escape out the leaves as vapor through the open stoma. When we take a look at the roots, so we have, as part of the plant anatomy, remember in the shoots we have leaves and stems for body parts, and then we have the roots, which are the under the ground parts. And the two basic types of roots are a tap root or a fibrous root. So a tap root is a main root that grows down deep into the soil and usually grows relatively deeply, whereas a fibrous root system is made up of many smaller roots. Now you may think that a large plant needs to have a tap root, but in fact some very large trees have fibrous root systems with many, many small roots. So it's not the case that it is fibrous roots for small plants and tap roots for big plants. In fact, it is just a function of what the plant needs best. So what's an example of a taproot plant? Well, dandelions are taproots, and the taproot helps to anchor the plant really tightly into the grass, and that makes it really difficult to remove dandelions. And if you do happen to break the plant off and leave some of the root, it will just regrow a new shoot and a new dandelion plant, which can really frustrate those who want to keep their garden, their grasses, dandelion free. A fibrous root, I did mention a tree like shown here, but additionally we have grasses which produce many, many small roots, and these are great for sucking up and absorbing a lot of water. Another type of taproot, which I forgot to mention, would be a carrot. The carrot plant, the carrot is actually the taproot, and that's a great place to store lots and lots of starches, and that is what we consume. We are consuming the taproot of the carrot plant. Which leads me to our next slide, which is modifications for roots. So some roots have been modified to store lots and lots of starches, like those carrots in their taproots. Other taproots include beet plants and turnips, which are other root plants that store a lot of carbohydrates or starches in their roots. And then our very last slide looks into the way that water is moved through the xylem. We know that xylem transfers water from the roots to the shoots. But what pulls the water up? There are no pumps. There are no water pumps in a plant. So how does that water move up? Well, what happens is that there is an evaporation of water at the leaf stomata. So remember, way up here in the leaves, when the stomata opens, water vapor can escape. And water molecules like to hold on to each other like a chain. And this chain extends through the leaf, down through the stem of the water molecules holding on to each other, and down into the roots. So that as one water molecule is pulled out through the stoma, it pulls more water up through the xylem tubes in the body of the plant and from the soil into the roots through the root hairs. So it's like these water molecules are all holding hands, and as one leaves, it creates a negative pressure which draws up more water molecules from the roots. So remember, there are no pumps that are located inside of our plants, our vascular plants. So that is the total of material from chapter 30. Keep in mind that this material is found in and around sections 1 through 5. There is no material that you are responsible for from section 6. Also, there is lots of additional material in 1 through 5 that may not have been mentioned in this PowerPoint presentation. If it was not mentioned, then you are not responsible for the names of those terms. Thank you.